Welcome back to Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 87, part 2, this week in macro. Right, so we started this week essentially by Trump officially saying and signaling that a trade deal with China is coming. That pumped the market up to new all-time highs. So the old strategy is essentially happening. We also had Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary. He's basically focused on the big deals, which is a deal between China and America and China and India, i.e. the two biggest and largest populations and economies behind BRICS, and obviously India being the fastest growing economy in the world right now. We've benefited from his partnership with China, with Russia and China. And although China and India have their beef, they're still doing much trade, and it's an important relationship. And with Russia, they were able to get gas and oil to Europe via India, and India is able to take advantage of these sanctions. And then there was the beef with Pakistan because the Proof of Weapons Network is selling vast weapons while India is producing its own weapons. It also is buying vast weapons from Lockheed Martin, General Dynamic via the Blackrock portfolio companies in order to gain their little bit of control over India. And China is competing with the International Monetary Fund through Pakistan. And so that was all about vassalizing Pakistan more into China and vassalizing India more into the Proof of Weapons Network, so that as BRICS rises, they can use India as the host nation. And we started to get a little bit more signals that Pakistan will be backing up Iran if this ever goes nuclear. And that was much of the narrative that was happening because they wanted to come after Pakistan next as part of that BRICS trade and to vassalize Pakistan into China partnerships, because BlackRock is hedging against US. It's using US as the host nation for its surveillance state, its Mach 7 technology companies, its energy play for artificial intelligence and robotics, while it gets capital outflows through the tariff policy implemented by Trump, which has the impact of pushing everyone closer to BRICS, while Trump negotiates the deals so that the companies, the corporations in the BlackRock portfolio all benefit from all of the trade deals. As companies go bust, just like COVID, they can acquire the distressed companies, and the export-driven countries can also be pushed closer to BRICS and also get acquired into the large multinational corporations that have their stock prices in US. It's consolidation of wealth, a movement over from Main Street to Wall Street, and the ushering in of a multipolar world. And so we had the trade war that happened first, even though this was really, China had already won the trade war. And this was the execution of the result. And then we had the deal that we're having with Iran and Israel right now to reset the world order. And I'll be covering more of that in the geopolitical section. But Scott Bessent was saying that it's focused on China and India, i.e. the deals the BlackRock portfolio companies and large multinational corporations need in order to get their control over ports, various other things, like it was negotiating. BlackRock controls about 26 different ports, even the Panama Canal. That was Trump negotiating for BlackRock because America has been vassalized and controlled, as Europe and UK, by the large multinational corporations that have invested in this multipolar world. But we didn't really hear anything on what was going to be happening with Canada. They said that basically we're focusing on the largest economies first. So European Union next. They've already announced that they've done a deal with UK. Nothing burger to it. And so the market really at this stage is not taking tariffs seriously. The damage is done. The relationships have been reset. The impact of tariffs has not been fully understood in terms of inflation yet. And that was reflected with the Federal Reserve statements, which we'll be going through today. But the market just doesn't take it seriously. I think it just believes everyone will move to 10%. And the US is just a volatile country to work with, and everybody should be hedging their bets. That's the end result. Meanwhile, the large concentrated wealth in the US stock market went up to new all-time highs, as I said it would, as more and more small business gets consolidated into large corporations, as well as those trade routes globally. So everything happened as if you've been following Bitcoin Hard Talk. We talked about with the tariff policy, and in the geopolitical section, we'll cover the follow-on play. The market's basically saying we think it's going to be 10% or something. The damage is essentially done. BRICS won. The economy, basically transferred some wealth, and there's more and more to go. And the S&P hits new all-time highs. Right, that chapter is done. Now we're coming to the end of the deadline. Remember, he said we've got 90 days. So you're going to start to see more and more market manipulation, as we have seen, as we end those days, and then a narrative around how do we extend if it wants to, because it hasn't had the full desired impact yet in terms of benefiting the large corporations. So my guess is that we enter into some kind of extension, more insider trading that creates volatility, and more concentrated wealth, as essentially the stock market is fully controlled by those top 1%, most of the stocks, I think over 50%, and the rest, the top 10%, and it's stealing wealth from everybody that doesn't own those stocks. But also, not only that, but the stock market is essentially, it's not the S&P 500, it might as well be the S&P 7 plus a few more energy and steel and different types of infrastructure that supports the tech companies. Because the Magnificent Seven stocks is essentially the top 10, the top 10% is almost the entire S&P. So you've now got anything where the stock market goes up, concentrates wealth into a smaller number of people, and concentrates wealth into a smaller and smaller number of corporations. The rest, screw you. We don't care about you. That's where the American economy is. Why? Because government is subordinate to the proof of weapons network. The proof of weapons network is managed by the asset managers like Blackrock. They set policy. They pay through lobby, military lobby, farmer lobby, banking lobby, APAC lobby, in order to get the policies that they need in order to concentrate wealth over to them. So we had comments from Jerome Powell at the at the Federal Reserve from the FOMC meeting. And as no surprise, as we said on Bitcoin Hard Talk, they did not cut rates. And the more important thing is what Jerome Powell was saying. It always is. So he's basically saying that he's not going to cut rates until we get back to 2% inflation. At the same time, the markets are predicting an 80% chance that by September, he cuts rates. So the market is different from what Jerome Powell is saying. I'm not sure. I think we've peaked in terms of the bottom of inflation. We haven't seen the full impact of tariffs, and I think that will lead to an increase in the price rates. Now, obviously, there's lots of manipulation around changing the classification of what's included in inflation all the time. But that aside, you can look at trueflation, or you can look at CPI, or you can look at the producer price, PPI index. Take whatever pick you want. It has been coming down, and it looks like this has bottomed, is my prediction now. So how can you cut rates? Because it's meant to be a tool for controlling inflation. Jerome Powell said he won't be cutting until the inflation is at 2%, and we're not there yet. At the same time, he had to do his testimony in Congress this week. And here's a little summary. Basically, he was saying and testifying that the ultimate tariffs level will determine, their impact. So if we don't know what the tariff level is, then we don't know what the impact is. And so if Trump does an extension on the tariffs and we get a wave of negotiations that will take longer to actually materialize, this is basically a destabilization campaign, as I've always said the tariff policy is, to reset the world order into multipolarity. But Powell was saying, I don't know what the impact of tariffs is until we've actually got what the tariffs are. So this is more and more kick the can down the road destabilization campaign. He also said at the same time, the US economy, the labor market, they remain solid positions as measured by the stock market, i.e. wealth concentration. That's why we're having lots of civil unrest campaigns on the street, as the rich get richer, the poor get poorer, as designed by the debt-based Ponzi scheme. He said also that long-run inflation is expected to be consistent with the 2% target. So he's expecting it to get back to 2%. I disagree. Maybe he knows things that I don't know, but I think this might be a narrative because I think it's going to go up from here as we start to see the impact of tariffs, but he's managed to get that delay, that never-ending delay. So Trump will continue to say Jerome Powell is the biggest idiot in the world, that type of narrative. They both work for the banks, by the way. Jerome Powell is just a muppet for the banks that control the Federal Reserve, and Trump is owned by the financial industrial complex, and so he tends to be a deal maker for the financial side of the industry. But remember what I said last week, the Straits of Hormuz won't create the disruption. That would be a financial Armageddon. It would be a financial holocaust. It would disrupt the markets immensely. It would have a massive impact on oil prices. It would ruin the debt rollover. It would increase the long-term rates that America needs to borrow. But it can't actually practically happen because if you were watching the geopolitical sections, you'll know that I was saying this is theater towards a coordinated outcome. And I'm doubling down on that, despite the fact, I'll go through that in part 3. But this week we had in the theater, the Iranian parliament voted to close the Straits of Hormuz and said, but we won't do it. It's up to the Security Council in order to do it. So it was all rhetoric and it was all part of that. Now, that was definitely part of an oil price manipulation campaign. Immediately, the price of oil went up, higher. They went up to a peak of about $78. So it was up over a few days, based upon the announcement. But it was never insiders. It was never so high up that it went up to like $100, $120 if it was treated as a credible threat. So the big money knew that it wasn't real. But the small manipulated money knew that it was real. And so they started buying, thinking that the price of oil will go up. The large institutional money knew no. The retail started buying based upon it. And every single time the price of oil sparks meaningfully, it basically means a recession follows. So we would expect that to be a big recession. It would be a correction in the market. But the market did none of that. The market wasn't pricing in any of it. So while everyone on the spaces was panicking, I was saying the market doesn't believe you. It doesn't believe that this is a real war. It believes that this is coordinated. It's market manipulation. Normally that would lead to, if the price of oil went up that far, you'd have a correction in the market. You'd have higher long-term rates. And that would happen faster than the short-term rates, which the Federal Reserve controls. That makes the cost of refinancing the American current economy greater. And anybody that listened to Bitcoin Hard Talk knew that it wouldn't happen anyway. So it was just other people that were buying oil based upon this news. Immediately, or not immediately, we had a correction of approximately 8% of oil. And that was happening as Iran was firing at the Qatari bases. So the price of oil was going down 8%, while Iran was escalating towards firing at US bases in Qatar. As I said, everybody else was saying Iran, US is about to go into, this is going to be World War III. US is about to go into war with Iran. Israel rules the world. And because Israel rules the world, is pushing America into war. And therefore, this is going to be firing at Qatar. And immediately the price of oil followed. I was telling everyone on X Spaces, none of that's happening. America's not going to war with Iran. Israel does not control America. Israel is a colony of America. And there is a bigger strategy that we've been covering throughout the months on Bitcoin Hard Talk. Not a US strategy, but a Blackrock strategy based upon being invested in BRICS and the GCC. So if this was real, the price would have gone up and shot up above $100. Now, you could interpret this that obviously, because this is Blackrock Strategy, BlackRock knew how to manipulate through the hedge fund division of the financial industrial complex. If you believe that politics is in charge, Trump would have also known about it, and he would have leaked it to his financial buddies that may not have been involved in the inner circle of the military industrial complex. And so therefore, that is what led to the crash, because people were trading ahead knowing that as Iran was firing at Qatar, which would normally be an escalate, which would pump the price, that an Iran peace deal was going to follow. And look, lo and behold, that's exactly what happened. And so the oil price predicted the whole thing, which gave the reinforcement for my geopolitical analysis that nobody believed other than the Bitcoin hard talk people that watch every week. The whole thing was pure theater, pure market manipulation, and that is a massive, massive volatility trade to the insiders and the proof of weapons network and the hedge funds that were making money at the expense of retail that was following the media and believed in the narrative. There was an announcement from Trump at the same time people were talking about. So, Trump has been building the strategic petroleum reserves in case, what happened with Biden is he started releasing in order to control inflation after the Ukraine-Russia invasion. And that's a real war, by the way. That's not a scripted war. That's a real one. It was a coordinated attack by NATO to draw Russia into it, but Russia's fighting a real war, and BlackRock is vassalizing about 60% of the country now, and Russia will have the rest. Zelensky is an agent for the military-industrial complex, and they're fighting to the last Ukrainian, while Europe pushes out a narrative that they're fighting for democracy and prints $850 billion, steals $300 billion from Russia. There's $1 trillion of revenue via NATO that goes into the proof of weapons network, and America gets to print a fake GDP saying we're growing while it's stealing all that money from its people through inflation and a big, beautiful bill. But anyway, Trump said that he's not going to be using any of the petroleum reserve, the strategic petroleum reserve, which means that the price of oil is over to OPEC and OPEC plus, which is led by Russia, Saudi Arabia, and various other countries. Last week, we reported as well that the result of this, because through this campaign, Israel had to close its port, Haifa, which was part of the strategic vassalization that I'll be covering in part 3. But that meant that Jordan and Egypt weren't receiving their LNG. This was a disaster for both Jordan and Egypt because they've been vassalized by the International Monetary Fund, which forces them to buy LNG from America's colony to prop up that economy called Israel, which is a welfare state funded by America, where the money goes back to the military industrial complex and American corporations stolen from the people. And that's a part of, you have to subsidize the colony, which is why America over its years has spent over $400 billion. But through the wars, it brought in $10 trillion of revenue for the military industrial complex at the expense of the American people. But also, Iran had to stop exporting some of its resources to Iraq. And we know in Iraq, American bases in Syria and Iraq occupy the oil. And America funds the communist Kurds there in order to make sure that they can economically destroy Syria. And obviously, that's led to what the dirty wars and the civil wars and the ISIS invasion, which is funded by Western powers like USAID in order to destabilize economies so that you can take over those and occupy those resources. But anyway, those by the end of that, because the ports in both Israel and Iran were put back on, it avoided disaster. But they had approximately 2 days to fill the gap, and it would take 10 days to source those resources from somewhere else. So it was going to be a big problem. Another reason why there was kind of scripted progress there, because I think everybody in the region, including the GCC, including Jordan, including Egypt, including Iran, including the military industrial complex, including Saudi and various other parts, they all knew what was happening here. It was a scripted, managed transfer, as I'll be covering in part 3 and have covered for months now. But immediately, it was funny what came after that announcement. There was a really strange tweet. Or not tweet, Truth Social post. Trump came out and said that China can now continue to buy oil from Iran. That's really interesting. This is the first admission that sanctions no longer work, and America's okay with that process. Because Trump might as well work for BRICS at this stage. He has been the best BRICS salesman and policy salesman in the world, because we know he's controlled by the financial industrial complex, represented by Blackrock as the CEO that is invested in this GCC, multipolar, and BRICS world. Everything that Trump has done has been ushering in this artificial intelligence surveillance state within America, protecting themselves with Bitcoin, and supporting BRICS. He's like a BRICS salesman at this stage. Because China, essentially, Trump has done more for BRICS than the USA at this stage. And I believe that is by design, when you follow the money and follow the power structure. As I said, it would have taken 10 days to fix those oil supply routes, but this had to be ended sooner. And also at the same time, when you go through the money in Israel, this could never have been a long extended thing. And I'll go through the numbers, and I'm even going to do something fun this week in part 3. I'm going to price the numbers in Bitcoin, because I want you to always price things in Bitcoin. That's how you know the stock market is crashing, when in dollar value it's going to new all-time highs. Price it in Bitcoin, real estate's going down. Gold has had a little spike up, but it's been in general going down relative to Bitcoin. And all of the markets have been going down relative to Bitcoin in the long term. And so all of that's why I'm going to be doing that in part 3 as well. Anyway, there were more processes announced in the destabilization campaign. You've got this fight between the Federal Reserve and Trump that continues to escalate. Trump said that he's going to be announcing the new Fed chair soon. He did more and more comments around what an idiot Powell is and how he should be putting down rates. Basically, Trump needs to blame Powell for everything that follows and what comes next, because these auctions need to happen and, to roll over the $10 trillion of debt. Congressman Thomas Massie, he continued out his message. Remember, he's got the Fed bill. I talked about that in the pre-election, that you've got a less than 1% chance that this may happen. But by voting Republican, you may get some more attention and Trump to the end of Federal Reserve. But Thomas Massie continued to push out there ahead of his 2028 campaign. Remember, you cannot fix any of the US problems with tax reform. Tax reform is tariffs. You can reset the world order towards BRICS. You can change your relationship. You can insulate America into this technocracy, but you cannot change anything of the debt-based Ponzi scheme. You cannot pay down the debt when the dollar is debt. You have to have monetary reform, which is why these stablecoin bills, bit bond bills, you need to watch those. Tariffs doesn't fix the problem. You can only fix America's problem by having a monetary reform, because every dollar is debt. It is wealth confiscation, and the inevitable, predictable, guaranteed outcome of a debt-based Ponzi scheme is a K-shaped economy where the rich get richer, the poor get poorer, until you get civil unrest. And once you enter into civil unrest, you can have a monetary reform. One way of going about it is universal basic income backed by stable coins, by manufacturing a civil unrest campaign, which is what's happening with open border policy and mass deportations, and moving towards the Palantir surveillance state, which is really put through in this one big, beautiful bill, wrapped up in a MAGA narrative that they're looking to protect the borders. Without monetary reform, the private issuers of the dollar, the banks, will always occupy America, and the banks are consolidated into public companies controlled by the asset managers, and the Federal Reserve System will always work for the banks. Until you deal with that structure, you'll always enter into this. And I covered that in 2011 in my book, Bank to the Future, Protect Your Future Before Governments Go Bust. You can get a free copy of that on simondixon.com alongside all the other things in my newsletter, completely free, by joining the Bitcoin Hard Talk membership portal for free. So the government will always work for corporate interest. Politics will always be theater, and the government will never work for Americans. And so therefore, the only way to control politics in America is to actually boycott and affect share price, because the corporations are what control. And when share prices impact, you do get change. And so that's where you should place your effort. While that's happening, everything else is theater. And that was never more prevalent than the Iran-Israel theater to reset the world order and usher in the need for the big, beautiful bill. Because for your safety and security, you're seeing all the false flag narratives that are needed right now to say Iran is out to get you. Iran is doing these safety cells and all of the false flag operations that said, after all of that, what was it that saved us? We only had a 12-day war because we had the problems that are solved in the big, beautiful bill. And so the surveillance state, Patriot Act 2.0, is what you need, ushered in by artificial intelligence. And because of the 12-day war, because the surveillance state, because the money printing to the military industrial complex, because of that, the stock market went up to new all-time highs, the QQQ went up, NASDAQ is at its best stage, and Trump gets to celebrate saying, now all we need to solve all of our problems is the big, beautiful bill. So once he gets his big, beautiful bill, which is the next battle, you'll sign up to the surveillance state that Palantir is ushering through. You'll sign up to increase in the debt ceiling to $5 trillion. You'll sign up to $1 trillion over to the military industrial complex. You'll sign up to more and more debt, more and more money printing, more and more inflation. And then what will come up after that? You'll have an argument with Jerome Powell. Jerome Powell will get to say, see, what comes next wasn't me. It was because of what Trump did next. And so Trump can then install his puppet shadow Fed chair. The puppet shadow Fed chair can then lower rates. He was talking, if you listen to Trump's craziness, he was saying that you need to lower rates by 250 basis points. So basically head to ZERPs, zero interest rate policy. Return to the old economy where the rich get richer, the poor get poorer. Return to K-shaped wealth transfer. Roll over the debt in the short term. Do exactly what Janet Yellen did. Janet Yellen basically took all of the US debt and said, we can't afford that long-term rate. We can't sell those 10-year bonds or 30-year bonds. We're going to have to sell 1-month bonds or 3 months bills. And we're going to have to do it at that lower rate. So we have to refinance the economy every week, every month, every 3 months. We pay that lower rate and we refinance the whole thing on short-term debt, short-term debt, short-term debt. You can then back it by stablecoins, which Trump will be the issuer. You can then issue stablecoins with foreign direct investment deals, just like Trump did. He basically said, if Qatar wants to invest in Binance, send the $2 billion to my company, World Liberty Financial. I'll then issue $2 billion a stablecoin. I'll then invest that stablecoin into the Binance exchange, which is working at building capital markets and real world assets in the Middle East with the 260 million users. I'll then take that stablecoin and buy short-term debt And now I've bought $2 billion in the auction, and we can refinance it, and I can use the yield in order to buy Bitcoin. And then we can get more and more stablecoin issuers, and we can essentially become a bond dealership for stablecoin issuers that want to control the future of the dollar. And we can do the whole thing on short-term debt so that we continually have to refinance so that we can justify why the Fed is trying to decrease rates. But it won't work because the Federal Reserve decreased rate policy has gone further and further away from the 10-year bond and the 30-year bond. So essentially, the stable coins will be the only option for the 3-month, 1 year, 1 week and 1 month debt. And we can essentially turn America into a distressed emerging market trade, and credit ratings can downgrade us further. Now, that means that as you get downgraded further, the long-term rates on the 10 and 30-year bonds go up. And what does that mean? It means that has a negative impact on the real estate market. It has a negative impact on the auto loans because those loans are all based upon predictable debt. They have to pay higher rates on those 10-year and 30-year debt. And so the price of mortgages goes up. The price of auto loans goes up. The price on credit cards and rates go up. And you end up bailing out the economy by QE to infinity. So remember what I said with the tariff policy. You won't get QE. You won't get rate cuts. Everyone was predicting it at the time. No, this was to reset the world order. And then we move into stablecoin bills. Those impacts are having. And now we can transition back to the old policy. But we just need the time to reset the world order. So you delay the end. You have that 90-day tariff policy. You probably get extensions. You get no rate cuts. And in the meantime, the longer-term rates go up. At the moment, they corrected back a bit from their historical, rates of 4.5% and 5%. They corrected back down a bit. You support the internal BRICS trade, repatriation of capital, weakening of the dollar. We're now down to about 97.5%. So we went down below that 98% for DXY. And I think it goes down further. And lo and behold, what did we get an announcement of? We got an announcement that BRICS has now passed $1 trillion of internal trade. Now they're getting record high trade without the dollar. As the dollar weakens, capital repatriates. The stock market goes up to new all-time highs based upon the Magnificent Seven, the artificial intelligence and robotics plays, the energy plays, the steel manufacturing plays. Everything else is going down. And when you price the whole thing in Bitcoin, all markets are crashing relative to Bitcoin and relative to gold. So this is playing out exactly as predicted. And you can see how that plays into the geopolitical section. By following the money, not following the narratives, we get ahead of all the different trends as well. So that's going to do it for this week in macro. That's going to do it for part 2. Now, as I said, I would like you, if you enjoyed this macro section and you didn't watch part 1 on this week in Bitcoin, go back and see how the Bitcoin play and the macro play all play together to the geopolitical play as well. You'll find that Bitcoin is becoming more and more important in determining these macro trends. In fact, it is becoming a leading indicator over weekends, particularly for predicting the next phases as well, of both the macro and geopolitical section. But we are just 750 subscribers away from 100,000 subscribers on YouTube. Do me a favor, head over to YouTube right now. If you're not subscribed, hit subscribe, hit the bell symbol, hit all. Even if you're a subscriber, reset the algorithm because the shadow banning and press that again. And I think you'll start getting notifications after the shadow ban. If we could, in this episode, get 750 people to subscribe on YouTube, I'll get a review. Once I hit that 100K mark, the algorithms will start ranking and we can protect more and more people as we transition to this world of Bitcoin, AI, and CBDCs. But just in case after that review, they don't like my content, I make sure you follow me on X. I got 200,000 followers there now, and I do all my real-time spaces there. Follow me over there, and make sure you hit to get notifications every time, because they're shadow banning me there as well for telling the truth. They don't like the message. They don't want you to know about the proof of weapons network, but we need more people protected. I'm not boosted by the intelligence agency assets because my message is real, and so therefore I rely upon you. In case that goes wrong, we're streaming from Rumble as well. I've only got a very small following over there, so do me a favor. If those 100,000 people go over to Rumble, that's where we're going to be if we get shut down. So follow me over there. And finally, join the Bitcoin Hard Talk free membership portal. Go to simondixon.com, put your email in there, and you'll be on my newsletter, and you'll get all the content and all the previous goodies that you need to know to prepare for this world of Bitcoin, AI, and central bank digital currencies. So without further ado, that's everything we got for the macro section of Bitcoin Hard Talk episode 87. We're now moving over to part 3, which is Bitcoin Hard Talk episode 87, this week in geopolitics. I'm going to take a little bit of water while you do that. Retweet, reshare, do what you need to do, help the algorithms, and then we're going to move into part 3.